So when the bird approaches from that direction, Marion plays a call on the other side of the net, and hopefully the bird will just go directly to the call and go into the net. But sometimes they will go over the top of the net to get to the bird call.
I'm in a native forest with Marion and Joe from the Department of Conservation. We are surrounded by tall beech trees, and in the clearing, they have set up a mist net.
We sort of want a corridor in the trees. We want low foliage that the birds will come down to. We don't want it too close to the net because otherwise they don't hit the net with enough force to get caught. And if it's too far away, they hit the net with a lot of speed and they bounce out. So it's kind of a bit of a juggling act of setting it up so it's in a good spot for catching.
This is Marion Rhodes, and she's playing birdsong on the loudspeaker, trying to lure in one of Aotearoa's rare songbirds.
Marion's playing a distress call to try and encourage some interest from the other two birds that are up in the canopy, but they're looking decidedly uninterested.
So we wait.
He has come closer. He's coming closer.
Suddenly, I saw a bright yellow bird fly right into the net.
That's exactly how it's supposed to go, Karthic.
It's a Mohua, also known as the yellowhead. It's found only in the South Island and Stewart Island of Aotearoa, and only in small pockets of native forests like here in the Horn Valley in the Arthur's Pass region. For a bird that bright, Mohua are surprisingly under the radar.
A lot of people haven't heard about the Mohua, even though it's featured on our $100 banknote. A lot of people haven't seen a $100 banknote. And also it was, for a long time, it was known as the yellowhead. So when we call it by its correct Maori name, people go, what? Who? And I think that's a real pity because it once was pretty much the most common forest bird. So it's really nice to be able to raise awareness of the Mohua.
Marion and Joe are about to put color bands on the Mohua so that they can identify individuals and monitor their numbers in the Horn Valley.
And this population is quite important simply because it's one of the places that it's easy for people, it's accessible for people to come and see them on the mainland. Some of the places like the Landsborough are much harder to get to, so it'd be great if we had a really healthy population back here again.
My name is Karthik, and this is Tune Into Nature, a podcast bringing you sounds and stories from the wild. We journey through Aotearoa, New Zealand's wild places to meet unique wildlife and hear from the people working to protect them. I hope these stories will inspire you to enjoy nature in your own way. Part of this episode was recorded in a backcountry hut to avoid the sandflies outside, so just a heads up that in some parts you might hear some cooking sounds in the background. To make this episode about Mohua, I tagged along with Marion and Joe, walking 25 kilometers on rough terrain, on riverbeds, through forests, crossing the Horn River multiple times. This is one of the longest hikes I've done to make a podcast. But for Marion and Joe, this is just a normal day at the office. They have been working in the Horn Valley for over 10 years now.
It's definitely one of my special places, and I really enjoy coming back at the beginning of every season.
This is Joe Hulsman, Biodiversity Ranger with the Department of Conservation.
Saying hello to all the familiar places and seeing how things have changed and getting that feel. Is it going to be a good season? Does it feel like, there's a lot of mice around? Does it feel like there's a lot of birds around? Every year is just really different.
It's quite a small valley, compared to some of the other ones that we work in, like the Polter and so on. So it sort of feels a bit more intimate. The river's always right there. So, yeah, I like that about it.
Back in the clearing, Joe carefully holds the Mohua that flew into the net. and puts colour bands on its legs.
What about red, yellow?
Sure, red, yellow's fine.
Okay, red, yellow.
By using a unique combination of coloured bands, individual mohua can be identified, which helps keep track of their numbers.
And the weight is
53 minus bag.
Mohua weigh around 25 to 30 grams. They're roughly the size of a sparrow, with a bright yellow head and tinges of olive green on the back.
You can see how its tail feathers are all worn. It uses its tail as an extra kind of support or a leg when it's foraging on the trunks of the trees. So they get quite worn out. So it's been busy.
During the nesting season, only the female mohua sits on the eggs to incubate for around 20 days, and the male is busy finding food for his partner.
Some pairs, the female will come out of the nest and she'll make a complete riot of a noise to tell him, I'm ready to be fed, feed me, I'm here. Whereas other females just won't say anything and you won't know that they're there.
Social bonds like courtship feeding are important as mohua are monogamous and form long-term partnerships. But there are rare exceptions.
We had one male in the South Branch, and he had a nice partnership, and then we saw that his female seemed to be doing a lot of the work herself, and he wasn't around, and we found him with another female, and she was really bolshy, and she would come out and she would make all this noise. So he was busy with her, and his first female, she got left looking after her nest by herself.
So, yeah, she was like a solo nun.
She was, so the more time you spend watching them and learning them, they've all got their own different dynamics.
And you see unusual things, like that's not normal for a mohua to have two female partners normally. It's just a pair, and that's the only time we've seen that.
I think they've all got their own personality. So when we talk about this sneaky pair, it's a pair that they've eluded us for a couple of years because they just don't say much to each other. They don't make their presence felt.
They've been very sly.
Marion and Joe are mainly looking for unbanded birds to try and band them. Mohua are more often heard than seen, so as we walked, it was important to keep an ear out.
Was that a mohua cheddar?
I think, yeah. There, that was mohua.
So this one calling, do you think that's...
So that sort of song, do-do-do-do-do, is a male.
Male and female mohua look very similar, but they sound different.
It's that what we call a buzz call when she goes brrrr. He doesn't do that.
And he sings, he does quite a melodious song, which the female doesn't do.
So yeah, it can be quite tricky, and when we're catching birds, quite often it's the male that we catch because he's the one that's defending the territory and she might be on the nest. So we catch a lot of males.
So I have a saying, anything more than a two-bird day is a good day, so today's a good day.
Marion and Joe managed to catch and band 3 birds that day, and after releasing a banded mohua couple, Marion tells me about where the birds nest.
They can nest up to about 25 metres high, but this pair, from memory, their nest was probably about 12 metres up. But yeah, they tend to be higher and they tend to be safer if they're higher. So, because the animals on the ground won't hear chicks making noises and things like that.
Mohua prefer to nest in tree holes, so they need trees large and old enough to have cavities.
They were nesting in a mountain beach. It needs to be big enough to have a decent sized knot hole. So they won't pick trees generally with skinny trunks because they don't tend to have, they're not old enough to have good sized knot holes in them. And often when there's red beach about, that may be preferred because they tend to get big and have good knot holes.
Walking along the Howden River, we could see valleys and mountains covered in deep green beech trees. Most of the Arthur's Pass region is native beech forest, a favoured habitat for the Mohua.
If you look across the valley there, can you see the patch of trees that look kind of greener? So there's a patch of red beech through there. And when you start getting your eye into it, you can see on the other side of that big side stream, can you see there's a bit of a slip? Just a little one. You take your eye slightly to the left and up, you can see this big patch of really green trees. That's red beech as well.
Beech trees produce seeds only every 2 to 6 years, but during some years, most of the beech trees in the forest produce massive amounts of seeds all at once. And this sets off a chain reaction that has an impact on native forest birds like the Mohua.
2018 was what they called the mega mast. So the mast is the year when the trees flower prolifically and then they set a lot of seed, and you would call that a seed mast. And in 2018 they had quite a huge seed mast. We called it the mega mast, and when Marion and I were walking through here, our boots were just covered in pollen. There was just clouds of pollen coming out of the forest, and we all went, oh my goodness, this is going to be really, really bad for the birds. We knew that in a couple of months we would start to see this predator cycle ramping up and becoming a real problem.
Due to beech masting, the number of introduced pests like rats and mice increase rapidly. This leads to an increase in the number of stoats that feed on the rodents. And when the seeds have germinated, there's no food source for a large population of introduced pests, and they turn to native forest birds like the Mohua. Every beech mast year corresponded to a significant decline in the Mohua population, resulting in many local extinctions.
Can you see that tiny little red furry thing there?
Yeah.
That's the flower. There's just a few on this tree, but that's what kicks off the whole cycle. So we look to see, is there a lot of flower in the beech forest? So we start looking quite well in advance as to what the trees are doing, and that will help us predict what's going to happen for the birds down the track.
Beech masting is only a part of the problem. Historical records from the 19th century note that Mohua were one of the most common forest birds, so they were found in most forests on the South Island and Stewart Island. But the introduction of exotic pests like rats, stoats that can climb trees had a devastating effect on the Mohua, especially on the female birds that are vulnerable when they are nesting.
One time in the Catlins, we had a nest that, I'm pretty sure it was killed by a stoat, and we climbed it and looked in. The female was still on the nest, and the top of her head was gone and her brain had been eaten, and that was it. The rest of her was all there. So, it's quite devastating when you see things like that. You realise just how damaging those predators are.
Today in the South Island, Mohua are found only in fragmented populations with a very restricted distribution.
When I started working in the Dart in 2000 on the Mohua, it was probably about 2007, you'd encounter flocks of them, and if we were trying to sort of look for specific birds with bands on, you'd just be hearing Mohua all around you and thinking, should I look at that one or this one? And it was the Dart in my own lifetime had a really healthy population. And then in 2012, I think it was, there was a rat plague, and we lost probably 75% of the Dart Mohua in one season. And I'd been there surveying, counting them, and then I went back and it was just like, where are they all? So that was a real eye-opener for me, because it was sort of like seeing extinction happening in front of my very eyes.
And things were no different here in the Hardin Valley.
In the 1980s, it was still a pretty healthy place, and well, by 2010, it was down to 1 or 2 birds.
The Department of Conservation uses the New Zealand threat classification system to assess the threat of extinction to native species. And in 2021, the status of Mohua was changed.
The mainland population had been classified as recovering, but the Mohua recovery group managed to get it reclassified as declining, because the only place on the mainland where it is really recovering is in the Landsborough and the south branch of the Huranui. So overall, all the other populations are declining or extinct. So overall, it's still going downhill, and there needs to be a lot more work done to help it get back to a healthy state.
To help support the conservation work for Mohua and other native wildlife, the Mohua Charitable Trust was founded by Nigel Babbage in 2007. The trust helps with translocation, a process of moving endangered species like the Mohua to regions where they are locally extinct or in low numbers to re-establish a population. Marion is a trustee and a general manager and helps plan and execute translocations of Mohua around the South Island.
One of our trustees, Hannah Edmonds, has probably been involved with the most Mohua translocations of anyone in the country. So she's got a really high level of expertise. I've helped on a couple of translocations now. So a number of translocations have been done to the Eglinton Valley in Fiordland. There were 2 translocations done to the South Branch Huranui. There have been a couple of translocations here to the Hardin.
When Mohua numbers in the Hardin Valley were down to just a few, the trust helped in translocating 48 birds.
So every year, Joe and I work for Doc and come and count the Mohua here. This year we think we've got about 40 odd birds, which is actually slightly better than it sounds, because after we release the Mohua, there's always a problem with dispersal. So they don't all stay in the valley. A lot of them disappear and go into places that don't have any predator control. The first season after their release, we found 16 birds. So it's built up from 16 birds, but it's sort of been fluctuating in the sort of around the 30 to 40.
Spending a lot of time in the field working with the Mohua has offered Marion some unforgettable moments with the birds.
Actually, my first season doing Mohua in the Catlins, and we were looking for nests, and then we'd monitor the nests, and when they fledged, to be sure they were successful, you had to find the fledglings, which is quite hard because often they're way up in the canopy and they often just sit really still, and eventually you might find them by the parents going to feed them. But this one particular nest, it had 4 eggs and they'd all fledged, and they were sitting in a row on a little branch about eye height, and they still had the little fluffy bits on their head, and they were just all sitting there next to each other looking at me with these really big eyes. And I don't know, I think that's one of my all-time favourite Mohua moments is, that nest successfully fledged, and there they are. I can see them all, I can count them easily, and they look really cute.
Marion tells me how having a great colleague can make a huge difference.
Joe and I have been lucky enough to work together for 9 years, and lucky enough that we do get on really well. We sort of, we've got quite a few similar interests. So we both really enjoy gardening and plants. What else do we have in common, Joe? Eating. We like our food. I really enjoy my hot drinks, tea and coffee. So I like to get back to the heart. The first thing I do is put the kettle on, or if Joe's back first, she doesn't drink hot drinks, which I find very strange. It's her one failing. But Joe has learned that if she's back first and she knows I'm not far away, she should put the kettle on for me, because that will keep me happy. You definitely do form a bit of a special bond spending a lot of time together with, especially just, having a team of 2 people. We're lucky that we do get on so well.
In the south branch of Hurunui River, which is northeast of Hordern Valley, the Mohua numbers were once low, but after translocation, they are doing well now.
It kind of did what this valley's been doing, crept along at lowish numbers for a while, and then all of a sudden it got to 42 birds, and then the next year we came in and there were 70-something birds, and then the next year there were 100 and something birds, and there were more than we could count, and we had to change our method of monitoring. For the Hordern, that is my hope, is that next year we will come back and there'll be over 70 birds, and then we'll know that we're really hitting that upwards trajectory.
For people to be able to say, oh yeah, I heard a mohua when we pulled up at the Hordern shelter. For people to know what they are, for people to know what they sound like, for people to appreciate them and get excited about them would be wonderful. But for that to happen, we have to have loads more of them. To see flocks of mohua, that's what I'm after. That's what we should all be aiming for.
You are listening to Tune Into Nature with me, Karthik. If you like this episode, please follow the podcast on your favorite listening app and share it with those who might enjoy it as well. You can learn more about the Mohua on the website of the Mohua Charitable Trust and the Department of Conservation. If interested, you can also contribute to the Mohua Charitable Trust on their Give a Little page. There are links in the description. The podcast is kindly supported by the New Zealand Lottery Grants Environment and Heritage Fund, administered by Tari Taiwhenua, the Department of Internal Affairs. Supported by Professor Nancy Longnecker, Science Communication, University of Otago, ORFM Dunedin, and Wild Dunedin, New Zealand Festival of Nature. Thanks for listening.